September 1957, Tucson, Arizona, St. Mary's Hospital, 3rd floor, room 14. A girl of 8 named Gracie Holloway is lying in a bed that is too large for her, looking at the ceiling. She has been in this room for 6 weeks. She knows every crack in that ceiling. She has named the large one near the window Thomas, after a boy in her class who has a gap in his front teeth. On Friday evenings, the nurses wheel her bed to the corridor outside the common room so she can see the screen without walking. They have been doing this for 5 weeks. Last Friday, they showed a Western. A man in a tan Stetson rode across a canyon and did not look afraid of anything. Gracie watched him until the film ended, and then watched the blank white screen for a while after. Outside on a film set east of Tucson, a large man is standing between takes, sorting through a week's worth of mail his assistant has been holding. He is going through it quickly, setting most of it aside. He picks up a small envelope. The handwriting is a child's. His assistant says, "That one's probably nothing." The man opens it anyway. Here is the story. A child can understand that something is wrong long before anyone finds the words to explain it. Gracie Holloway understood it in the way children understand things that adults think they are hiding, completely and in silence. She understood it in February, when her mother stopped correcting her posture at the dinner table. She understood it in March, when her father came home from the doctor's office and went straight to the kitchen and stood at the sink for a long time without turning on the water. She did not ask what was wrong. She already knew the shape of it, even if she did not yet know the name. The name came in April. Leukemia. Dr. Harmon said it to her grandmother Margaret in the corridor outside the examination room, while Gracie sat inside on the paper-covered table and looked at the anatomy chart on the wall and listened through the door. Dr. Harmon's voice was the voice of a man reading from a report. Precise, not unkind, but not personal either. He looked at his clipboard when he spoke. He did not look at Margaret. Margaret said, "What do we do?" Dr. Harmon said, "We begin treatment immediately." Margaret said, "And if the treatment works?" He looked at his clipboard again. He said, "We hope." Margaret was 68 years old and had buried her daughter and son-in-law in an automobile accident 14 months earlier and had been raising Gracie alone since. She had the particular stillness of a woman who has already survived the worst thing she could imagine, and has since discovered that the worst thing can happen more than once. She listened to everything Dr. Harmon said. She thanked him. She went back into the examination room and sat beside Gracie and took her hand, and did not say anything for a while. Gracie said, "I heard." Margaret said, "I know." Gracie said, "Is it bad?" Margaret looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. She said, "We're going to fight it hard." Gracie nodded. She looked at the anatomy chart on the wall. She said, "Okay." That was all she said. Still with us? Hit hype. It tells us this story found the right people. By September, Gracie had been in room 14 for 6 weeks. The treatment made her tired in a way that sleep did not fix. Her hair had thinned. Her arms, always small, had gone thinner still. She spent most of her time in one of 2 states, asleep or watching the ceiling and thinking. Margaret came every morning and stayed until evening. She brought Gracie's things from home, her stuffed rabbit, her 3 best books, a small framed photograph of her parents taken the summer before the accident, both of them squinting in the sun, her mother's hand shading her eyes, her father's arm around her mother's shoulder. Gracie kept this photograph on the windowsill where she could see it from the bed. On Friday evenings, the nurses wheeled Gracie's bed to the corridor outside the common room. St. Mary's had a small film projector and a pull-down screen, and every Friday night they showed a film for the patients who could get there. Gracie could not always get there. Some weeks her body would not cooperate, but when she could, she went. She had seen 12 films since April. 7 of them had John Wayne in them. She had watched those 7 a combined total of 14 times. There was something about the way he stood. Gracie had thought about this at length during the long ceiling-watching hours. Other actors moved around a lot. They gestured. They filled the space with motion. John Wayne stood still and the space filled itself. He looked at things directly and without flinching, and when he spoke he meant every word and you could tell the difference. Gracie was 8 years old and she could tell the difference. She wrote the letter on a Tuesday afternoon in September when Margaret had gone to the cafeteria and the room was quiet. She used her best handwriting. She addressed the envelope to John Wayne, Hollywood, California, because she did not know a more specific address and felt that Hollywood was probably specific enough for someone that famous. She gave it to the nurse to mail and did not think about it again with very much hope, because she was 8 years old and understood how things worked. On the film set east of Tucson, the man opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages, written in careful pencil on notebook paper. It said, "Dear Mr. Wayne, my name is Gracie Holloway and I am 8 years old and I have leukemia, which is a kind of cancer. I am in the hospital in Tucson and I watch your movies on Friday nights. I am not writing to ask you for anything. I am writing because I have a lot of time to think, and I have been thinking about why your movies make me feel better, and I wanted to tell you in case nobody ever told you. When I watch you in a movie, I forget that I am sick. Not the whole time, just for a while. But a while is enough. My mother used to say that you remind her of my dad. My dad died last year. I think she was right. Yours sincerely, Gracie Holloway, room 14, St. Mary's Hospital, Tucson, Arizona. P.S. I know you are very busy and you do not need to write back." The man stood with the letter in both hands for a long time. His assistant was watching him. The assistant had worked for him for 4 years and had never seen him read a piece of mail twice. He read this one 3 times. Then he put it in his shirt pocket. He did not say anything. He walked back to his mark and the director called action and he finished the scene. Between the next 2 setups, he walked to the production office and made a phone call. And I am telling you, this actually happened. He drove to St. Mary's Hospital on a Thursday afternoon. He did not call ahead. He asked at the front desk for room 14 on the 3rd floor and carried a paper bag and a smaller bag and wore a plain canvas jacket and a tan felt Stetson hat, and the woman at the front desk recognized him immediately and said nothing because she understood from the look on his face that this was not a visit that needed announcing. He knocked on the door of room 14. Margaret opened it. She was 68 years old with white hair and the particular expression of a woman who has learned not to expect things and is therefore completely undone when something unexpected happens. She looked at the man in the doorway for a moment. She said, "She talks about you every day." Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. He said, "I know." He held up Gracie's letter. "She told me." He stepped inside. Gracie was in the bed. She was smaller than he had expected. The letter had been written in such a full and careful voice that he had not fully prepared himself for how small she would be. She was looking at him with an expression of complete stillness. Not surprise exactly. More like the expression of someone who has been told a fact and is waiting for it to become real. He pulled the chair to beside her bed and sat down. He was a very large man, and the chair was a hospital chair, and the combination was slightly absurd. But he sat in it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He said, "I got your letter." Gracie said, "I told you not to write back." He said, "I didn't." He gestured at himself. "I came instead." Gracie looked at him for a long moment. She said, "You're taller in the movies." He laughed. It was a real laugh. He said, "Everybody says that." If this story has you, hit the hype button. We read every single one. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. He stayed for 2 hours that first Thursday. He sat in the hospital chair and listened to Gracie talk. About the Friday film nights, about Thomas the ceiling crack, about the stuffed rabbit whose name was Captain, about her parents and the photograph on the windowsill. He asked questions and listened to the answers with the full attention of a man who has nowhere else to be and means it. When Margaret went to get coffee, he leaned forward and looked at the photograph on the windowsill. He said, "That your dad?" Gracie said, "Yes. His name was Robert. He was an electrician. He could fix anything." He looked at the photograph for a moment. He said, "He looks like a man who could fix anything." Gracie looked at the photograph too. She said, "I think about him a lot when I watch your movies. He did not say anything to that. He just nodded once, slowly, and looked at his hands for a moment, and then looked back at Gracie. Before he left, he opened the paper bag. Inside were things he had thought she might want. 3 new books, a box of colored pencils, a small leather-bound notebook with her initials embossed on the cover, G.H., that he had ordered that morning from a shop on Main Street. And from the smaller bag, a film reel in a round metal canister. He said, "I talked to the hospital. Next Friday they're going to show this one." He handed her the canister. "It's not my best picture, but it has a good horse in it." Gracie read the title on the canister. She looked up at him. He said, "I'll be here Friday." He was there Friday. He arrived before visiting hours started and waited in the corridor on a bench outside the elevator, and the nurses who passed him said nothing and pretended not to notice. When they wheeled Gracie's bed into position outside the common room door, he was already there, sitting in the corridor in a folding chair that was too small for him, his hat on his knee. The projector started. The corridor went dim. The beam of white light crossed the air above their heads and hit the pull-down screen, and the film began. Other patients were visible through the common room door, some in chairs, some in beds like Gracie, all of them facing the same direction. Gracie watched the screen with the complete attention she gave everything she decided to give attention to. He watched the screen too, which was strange, watching himself younger, thinner, crossing a landscape he remembered on a horse he remembered, saying lines he had long since forgotten saying. He had not watched one of his own pictures in years. He watched this one because Gracie was watching it, because it seemed wrong to look anywhere else. Halfway through the film, she looked sideways at him and then back at the screen. She said very quietly, "It's the same." He said, "What's the same?" She said, "You in the movie and you here, you're the same." He said, "I try to be." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching the film. Neither of them said anything else until it ended. When the lights came up, she was already asleep, her head turned toward the screen, her hands loose on the blanket. He sat with her for a while before the nurses came to wheel her back. He came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. 11 Thursdays in total, between October 1957 and March 1958. He drove from wherever he was, twice from Los Angeles, once from a location shoot in Nevada, and sat in the hospital chair and talked to Gracie Holloway. He spoke to Dr. Harmon after the second visit and arranged for a specialist from the Mayo Clinic to consult on the case. He paid for this without mentioning it to Margaret. Margaret found out anyway, the way people always find out, and said nothing about it to him directly, only squeezed his hand once in the corridor in a way that said everything. He brought things, books, more film reels, a radio for the room so Gracie could have music when the ceiling watching hours got long. Once he brought a photograph signed, "For Captain, the stuffed rabbit," because Gracie had mentioned that Captain was also a fan. The photograph said, "To Captain, keep an eye on her, J.W." Gracie kept it tucked under Captain's arm. The specialist from the Mayo Clinic adjusted the treatment protocol in November. Dr. Harmon reported in December that there had been measurable improvement. He said it carefully, the way doctors say things they do not want to be held to, but he said it. Margaret sat in the corridor after and put her face in her hands for a while. In March, on a Thursday morning, his assistant found him between setups on a studio lot in Burbank and told him quietly. He had been expecting it. Dr. Harmon had called 2 days before and used the careful voice again, the report-reading voice, and this time there had been nothing left to adjust. He did not say anything when his assistant told him. He walked to a chair at the edge of the set, a folding chair, the kind that gets left anywhere, and he sat down in it. The crew moved around him, resetting lights, marking positions. Nobody approached him. They could see from the way he was sitting. He sat there for a long time. His hands were flat on his knees. He looked at the floor in front of him. Then, very slowly, one tear traced down the left side of his face. He did not wipe it. He sat with it for a moment. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked back to his mark. The director called action. "You cannot make a man like that up." We put everything into these stories. The hype button is how you tell us to keep going. Gracie Holloway died on a Thursday morning in March 1958. She was 8 years old. Margaret was with her. Captain the Stuffed Rabbit was with her. The photograph of her parents was on the windowsill in the morning light. Margaret Holloway lived until 1974. She kept the photograph of Gracie's parents on her own windowsill for the rest of her life. She kept Captain on a shelf in her bedroom, and she kept, in a small wooden box in her dresser drawer, 3 things: the signed photograph of Captain, the leather notebook with GH on the cover. Gracie had used 14 pages of it, in colored pencil, mostly drawings of horses and one careful drawing of a man in a Stetson hat, and a letter. Not the letter Gracie had written, the letter he had written back. He had said he did not write back. He had come instead. But after Gracie died, he sat down and wrote the letter he had not written in September, the one that said what he had wanted to say when he first read her 2 pages of careful pencil on notebook paper. He wrote it to Margaret. It was 4 sentences long. Margaret read it once and put it in the box and did not read it again for many years. When she died, the box went to a cousin in Flagstaff. The cousin knew what it was. She kept it. He visited 11 times, 11 Thursdays. He drove from Los Angeles twice and from Nevada once and from Tucson several times, and he sat in a hospital chair that was too small for him and talked to a girl who forgot she was sick for a while. That was what she had asked for in the letter. A while is enough, she had written. He gave her 5 months of Thursdays. In a house in Flagstaff, in a small wooden box in a dresser drawer, there is a leather notebook with GH on the cover, 14 pages in colored pencil, horses mostly, and one drawing of a man in a Stetson hat, careful and exact, the way an 8-year-old draws something she has looked at a long time. The morning light comes through the window of that house every day and lies across the dresser where the box sits closed. It stays for a while, then it moves on. If this story reached you, do me a favor, pass it on. Share it with someone who showed up for someone who needed it. There are more stories coming.